So, with not only the sun out, but also the guns out this summer, I decided to catch up on a movie series that I was born just too late to get nostalgic over, but just early enough to find awesome on principle. Michael Bay's Transformers. Are they any good? Not really, but what makes each entry stunningly awful and or awfully stunning changes from entry to entry over an entire decade. So now that I'm sufficiently primed to review 5 films in one sitting, let's first roll out to Transformers from 2007. A crass, chaotic, but admittedly generally well-composed sci-fi adventure. Having been born just late enough to not grow up with the source material, everything but a few character names and some groan-worthy lines, not one but 2 variations of More Than Meets the Eye, flew over my head. Meaning that the most this conceptually has going for it is the Bayham. And that's not nothing. Since the ascendance of family-friendly, pre-viz-centric blockbusters, many have reappraised Michael Bay's macho zeal, and for good reason. There's no singular iconic set piece, and yet the film is peppered with slick, awe-inspiring shots of the action and LA-adjacent landmarks. Beyond even just his surface-level flair for bright colors and big explosions, the director knows how to wrangle dippy technobabble and make a script move, while still cultivating a fitting amount of suspense for a story about robots in disguise. Still, while impressive on a technical level, whenever there's some actual transforming going on, it just looks messy. The cast is generally strong. Shia LaBeouf cements his status as aughts Hollywood's go-to frantic dweeb, Jon Voight's Secretary of Defense is appropriately stuffy, and John Turturro hams it up well as a roundabout man in black. As for Megan Fox, her surname's as accurate as ever, but even putting aside the no doubt justified grievances about Bay that later get her sacked from the series, the girl really can't act here. Anthony Anderson and Bernie Mac play amusing smaller roles, and then I guess Josh Duhamel is on the perimeter with a B-plot that makes this movie into a bizarre combination of a teen sex comedy and Metal Gear Solid. Seriously though, folks will chide the MCU for military fetishism, but there's a whole book to be written about how Bay seized on the post-9/11 moment to make a Transformers film that starts with Qatar, the Middle East, thanks for the clarification, and ends with sentient tanks and planes laying waste to a metropolis. That, and I'm all for irreverent humor, but Bay is in rare form here with his penchant for bonehead comedy, ranging from dopey political jibes, getting a ding-dong for a heard but not seen President Bush, to corny cartoon gags, half a dozen Autobots implausibly hiding outside of a house, to honestly pretty insensitive, like deriding a Latino character for speaking Spanish as a running joke. There's multiple jokes about porn stashes, Bumblebee pees on a man, and a kid name checks Armageddon. Nevertheless, there's just as many moments that are my kind of dumb. A giant metal scorpion, Optimus Prime with a blade arm, the Hoover Dam being constructed as part of a secret government agency conspiracy, the like. Also, the original score is pretty good, even if one part is just straight up a Terminator fanfare. Things that aged well, a police car reading To Punish and Enslave homicide. Things that don't, eBay being a vital plot point, a 2GB SD card, Furby product placement. Things that could go either way, closing us out with What I've Done by Linkin Park. And then we come to Transformers Revenge of the Fallen from 2009. A sludgy, slapdash successor to the already cacophonous Transformers. Much has been made about how Revenge of the Fallen was pinned, at least partly during the 2007-2008 WGA strike, and while I wouldn't necessarily have suspected that going in cold, criminy does it show. I've seen longer films, but few which feel this long. To its credit, the story is full of fun new ideas, like a Gremlins-esque sequence of Sam's home electronics going rogue and a kaiju-sized Decepticon comprised of numerous other machines. Also, the bot-on-bot fight scenes go harder than ever, even if the visual clutter of the characters' fundamental appearances remains a dizzying eyesore. However, most of the plot is more rushed and or confusing than satisfying. If a Decepticon can disguise itself as a sexually aggressive co-ed, why don't a lot of them just imitate humans all the time like the Terminator? Did Megatron really just casually fly out to one of the moons of Saturn in a matter of hours? Why cast Rainn Wilson to play a horny astronomy teacher for 2 minutes? The new Transformers proper aren't much better. Least of all, a pair of astonishingly tacky, gangster-coded Autobots and lines like punk-ass Decepticons had me cringing hard enough to nearly fold into a small vehicle myself. Adding more locations as well was exciting in theory, but while we hop from Shanghai to New York to Jordan and beyond, the back half mostly takes place in Egypt, right after one of the hardest pivots in setting that I've seen outside of Inception. From the Smithsonian Museum to an enormous airfield right outside, then a literal teleport across the globe courtesy of an elderly Transformer, which also apparently transplants a cast under our hero's arm. In a vacuum, a film executive produced by Steven Spielberg which includes Cavemen, Ancient Aliens, Linkin Park, Dorm Room Comedy, a riff on Indiana Jones, and Megan Fox and Daisy Dukes working on a motorcycle while 21 Guns by Green Day plays would attain goated status in my house. However, in execution, Michael Bay and the mostly returning cast can do little to buoy a half-baked script. There's explosions aplenty, sure, but of those 2.5 plus hours, far too many are spent on Top Gun adjacent B-roll and juvenile gags like Sam's mom getting unrealistically high on a pot brownie or a little Decepticon voiced by Tom Kinney humping Fox's leg. It's just another MacGuffin hunt, only this time with more tomb raiding and interminable shootouts in the desert. Also, on a fundamental narrative level, walking back Bumblebee recovering his voice at the end of the last film just pissed me off. Another 2 years brings us to 2011 and the third film, Transformers: Dark of the Moon, a gratuitous, punishingly long sci-fi action comedy extravaganza, but one which blessedly reins in its predecessor's shortcomings and aims for the stars with their strengths. Despite its title, the moon and the dark thereof actually aren't the most central location of the film. After an opening where the awesome alt-history conspiracy of Apollo 11 seeking a crashed Transformer ship is offset by JFK CGI that's the second worst thing to happen to the ex-president's head, our satellite mostly just acts as the site of a latest light recon. For indeed, there is yet another powerful Cybertron artifact but no one mentioned until now. Rather, events take place mostly around DC, where Sam is now struggling to get a job, and Chicago, where the last act becomes a calamitous siege that, while astounding in its scope and scale, clear precedent to the climax of the Avengers, I genuinely cannot imagine anyone being able to finish this in one sitting. Oh, and Ukraine. Why not? Where the Autobots' new Team America World Police shenanigans treat us to the glorious sight of Optimus Prime rolling through Chernobyl. Along the way, we get some of the best set pieces and Transformers designs so far. As ever, these things are generally just dizzying lumps of scrap metal, but I dug the burrowing tentacle Decepticon, and that highway chase was pretty hype. That some humans are collaborating with Decepticons makes for an alarming development, although I had to laugh at the suggestion that them killing Earthlings is new. Oh, and I'm sorry, but what does a planet of giant self-mending robots need with mortal slave labor? Still, cheesy as it may be, I genuinely do like Optimus's unflapping nobility, how his struggle with legacy parallels Sam's, and his lack of hesitance to straight up execute a fool in the middle of the street. They gave him an axe and a shotgun. Megatron decimating the Lincoln Memorial to sit in its throne, I must confess, went pretty hard as well. Best cast yet delivers. In addition to our returning heroes, less Oneness Fox, we get Frances McDormand as a testy agency lead, John Malkovich as Sam's high-strung new boss, Alan Tudyk as a goofy manservant slash hacker, Patrick Dempsey in a rare heel turn, and because it is, after all, 2011, Ken Jeong is a manic whistleblower who briefly dual-wields pistols before getting thrown out of a window by a mechanical vulture. Also, in one wild-ass moment, Buzz Aldrin plying himself to greet the Autobots. And hey, it's Leonard Nimoy as Sentinel Prime. Could have done without Bill O'Reilly cameo, but how quaint it is to recall a time when Fox News would believably scoff at a conspiracy theorist. Make no mistake, a lot still doesn't work here. Michael Bay has dialed back the dumb jokes, less of the elder witwickies than ever, but some annoying little bots just had to stick around, and I think we can all agree the midpoint office comedy could be trimmed down. Also, while I won't necessarily complain, the director's horniness is at an all-time high, introducing us butt first to Sam's new girlfriend, who spends the rest of the film carrying herself like a spotless supermodel, and stalking the extras gallery with random babes before finally saying the quiet part out loud and comparing a woman to a car. That, and while anything's uphill from Revenge of the Fallen, this ain't an A-tier script. Teleporting an entire planet into our orbit is a magnificent image, but it took way too long to understand what the pillars were, let alone see one. Points off on principle for having the big blue sky beam too. And if Sam is getting shafted by the government after saving the world, why is he apparently living in a downtown mansion? But then Linkin Park and Paramore come around to play us out, and it's all beside the point. Bay does spectacle, plain and simple. And while I don't think I could bring myself to watch this particular entry again, I'm glad I stuck around at least this long to see how nuts the series gets. For film number 4, after a considerable gap, we come to Transformers: Age of Extinction, and guys, I really didn't think it would happen, but this one's got the juice. Yes, Mark Wahlberg is catastrophically miscast as a scrappy inventor slash single dad, let alone a Texan, but once the running and gunning commences, he's a far more mature, engaging protagonist than Sam Witwicky ever was. Also, thanks to a combo of livelier personalities and what feels like a subtle glow-up in cinematography, I found myself actually able to care about the latest batch of Autobots. Be damned if I can remember any of their names, but at least I can tell them apart. The new, well, what actually happened this time retcon is also an all-timer. Not only did aliens beyond the Transformers exist, but they killed the dinosaurs to create the raw material necessary to form Cybertron. While a direct sequel to Dark of the Moon, Age of Extinction offers a soft reboot in many regards. None of the human players return, and even Optimus isn't himself, as when Wahlberg's Cade Yeager, what a name, finds the Prime, he's a dusty, surly stowaway in an abandoned theater who's grown to doubt humans after the government terminated their alliance. Given this semi-clean slate, the cast doesn't disappoint. Kelsey Grammer as a CIA bigwig puts in a solid villain performance, as does Titus Welliver as his number 2, but it's Stanley Tucci who steals the show as a petulant tech billionaire whose dirty dealings bring about a new breed of man-made Transformers for the Autobots to tackle. Meanwhile, Michael Bay meets his orange babe quota with Yeager's daughter, and as annoying as TJ Miller is, he's at least abruptly Pompeyed within the first hour. It's the Irish boyfriend who confounds me, as while I understand his narrative role, I found his accent inconsistent, and I can't stress enough how demented it is to carry a laminated card in your wallet explaining why it's legal for you to have sex with a teenager. Aside from Cade fighting a real estate agent though, there's fortunately less dumb comedy than ever, at least of the intentional variety. Using a drone to put a card in an ATM is the closest that I've come to just pausing a movie and saying, "What?" It's crazy because even though this is still the longest Transformers, it doesn't really feel like it. The dialogue from everyone except Optimus and his nemesis is generally pretty bad, yes. The world building often contradicts itself. Optimus being some kind of fallen knight comes right the hell out of nowhere, and Autobots are hated yet lauded enough to sell products based on them, and we get some downright egregious product placement. From Oreo to Beats by Dre to what may as well be a Bud Light TV spot. But every time I felt like reverting to hater mode, one of the coolest things I'd ever seen would happen, topped only by what came 10 minutes later. A robot with a face that turns into a gun. A sword that also turns into a gun. A robot with an even bigger sword riding a robot dinosaur. A robot with a trench coat. A robot with a giant assault rifle played by John Goodman smoking a mortar shell like a cigar. A shootout against cybernetic wolves atop a bridge of harpoon cables high above Chicago. All of this and more can be yours if you park yourself in front of this flick. Even the trip to China, obligatory for a 2010s blockbuster, is a joy, as battles across both urban sprawl and the lush countryside dazzle. Honestly, ungainly transformation visuals aside, the CGI consistently looks great too. The Decepticons are back, there's another ancient doodad to fight over, and every other set gets blown up within minutes. At bottom, it's business as usual for this franchise at this point. And yet, amidst the typical firefights, car chases, globetrotting, and black ops, Bay pulls off a family road trip adventure that's also an insightful, if not trite, commentary on the military-industrial complex and America's low tolerance for aliens, with plenty of space for goofy blue-collar triumphs like throwing a football at a bad guy to move in for the kill. At last, Steven Spielberg as executive producer shows. While the other movies were funny, this one's just plain fun. Now, if only Optimus Prime flying off into outer space to essentially fight God was soundtracked by Linkin Park and not Imagine Dragons. And then we come to Transformers: The Last Night for 2017. Watching this film, I was reminded of an episode of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, where Jimmy uses AI to generate the ultimate movie by mashing together Star Wars, The Matrix, Harry Potter, and countless other franchises, and how terrible of an idea that turns out to be. Michael Bay's final Transformers is more of a juvenile, literally heavy metal Van Art core nonsense that captivated me with Age of Extinction, but with the scattershot, feverish, yet interminable plotting of Revenge of the Fallen. The 4 screenwriters on this flick can use all the gobbledygook they like, but sci-fi is in the rear view here, and we are in straight-up fantasy mode. With a 3-headed dragon, end times prophecies, Stonehenge, a magic staff, a sentient talisman, tomb raiding, sexy British historian and all, and a gun that can slow down time. Oh, and the most audacious retcon yet. Transformers have been secretly involved with pretty much every major historical figure and event from the centuries, dating back to the friggin' Knights of the Round Table. Also, a Transformer killed Hitler. Sit with that for a bit. The Bayformers series has been allergic to continuity since its second entry, so I don't intend to harp on about that anymore, but when and how The Last Night chooses what to carry over from its predecessors is maddening. Josh Duhamel is back to bark more orders, as is John Turturro hiding out in Cuba, but Stanley Tucci's only appearance is a cameo as Merlin, and despite the Order of Witwicky being on par with the Illuminati, the last titular descendant implicitly perished off screen. Megatron's back somehow, but his motive is entirely different, and the Suicide Squad-esque intros for his crew are a waste when half of these Decepticons are just more gangster stereotypes that I thought that Bay left in the aughts. The new human cast is lacking too. Tony Hale is just an unnamed NASA nerd, the girl power surrogate daughter doesn't get much of consequence to do or say, and Cade's new sidekick fumbles more jokes than he lands. I had high hopes that Anthony Hopkins would salvage the picture, but I never quite got comfortable with his character's oscillations between upper crust exposition and profane rambling. The best fresh face is Cogman. It's derivative, sure, and your guess about the function of a steampunk humanoid on Cybertron is as good as mine. But I can't not warm up to a clockwork manserpent with anger issues who has a rotary phone in his torso and quotes "move bitch" while speeding through Soho. On a technical level, too, this flick is messy even for Bay. The CGI looks fantastic, but there's a lot of ADR voiceovers, disjointed shot reverse shot takes, and distracting conveniences like Transformers brawling across an intersection without anyone disturbing the streetlights. Most baffling, though, are the constant shifts in aspect ratio. Going in, I knew The Last Night was clowned on for one particular instance, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Letterbox changes aren't uncommon in cinema, but the ones that happened here were so frequent, obvious, and bereft of any apparent artistic intent that it invariably took me out of the movie. Now on to the positives. I like Bumblebee beating up a bunch of guys while reassembling himself. I like the sequence where Cade and company race through an abandoned town while fending off a fleet of drones. And alright, I liked going full Indiana Jones by diving into a sunken ship to find an ancient crypt and giant zombie-looking guardians. The climax deserves praise as well. Sure, summoning Cybertron is a retread, but the way the looming planet anchors itself onto Earth, sinewy cables tearing out chunks of land and forming Avatar-like floating islands is, physics be damned, the kind of imaginative, grandiose imagery that I crave in my blockbusters. Lastly, Optimus Prime Breaking Bad makes for a pretty shallow conflict, but it does afford a brief friends to enemies battle that ends with B finally, for real this time, using his own voice. Looking back, it seems strange that things effectively ended here. There's been more Transformers movies, sure, but none that follow up on the insane, overt sequel tease that Earth is actually Unicron, the enemy of Cybertron, and consequently has giant horns growing out of it. Maybe it's for fear of seeming too similar to the Eternals at this point, but regardless, I'm good. I don't know much about Transformers, but I know they don't belong with wizards or British castles, and if that was the trajectory, then maybe prequels are the way to go after all. End of an era that it is, The Last Night is like Ready Player One with only a single IP. An orgy of genre concepts and imagery that's a wonder to behold, but exhausting and irrational, both moment to moment and on the whole. So over 10 years, 5 films, and far too many exploding skyscrapers, what have we learned? Well, giant robots are cool. Giant robots of swords are even cooler. And while CGI with a distinct style ages better than bland green screen scenery, that doesn't necessarily mean it looks great, especially when it doesn't have a focused, intelligent script to make that all worth looking at. I didn't regret my time with Prime and company on the whole, but if it's all the same, I'll stick to Pain and Gain or Ambulance for my next Michael Bay rewatches. And yeah, I'm not gonna go see Rise of the